Welcome to They Live by Film, a film discussion podcast focusing on the Criterion Channel and beyond. My name is Adam Lundy, and I'm joined as always by my co-hosts Chris Haskell and Zach Bryant. Happy New Year, guys. How are you doing?
Happy New Year. Happy New Year. It's been a decent start. Hasn't completely went off the rails yet, so we'll count that as good.
Yeah, first day in.
We're on day 2 of 2022. No one's dead yet, so I think we're doing okay.
Yeah, I was actually like, maybe it was best that Betty White died at the end of 2021, so I didn't have to hear all over Facebook like, the year's already started out. Shit.
Well, depending on what part of the year, she might have died in 2022. To any Australian listeners, we're sorry that your 2022 started so shit.
That's true.
Just before we go into the things, just going to have a slight change of the format just going into this year. We had a chat, a bit of a huddle, just about things that we can maybe change or improve. On the podcast coming into 2022, we had a pretty fixated format, and it's not going to change all too differently. We're still going to go for the two films, and then sort of discussion on either side of them. Just going to maybe mix up how we're going to be discussing, where we're pulling some of these films and how we're going to integrate our interviews going forward. So any OG podcast listeners will know that the old format was Criterion Channel film, Collection Corner, Criterion Channel film, any other business. That's been largely unchanged, except for when we have interviews, and then we put those in the middle sometimes if they're not too long. One thing we are changing, we are still going to be watching Criterion Channel films. We are still running our Criterion Channel Film Club over on Reddit, the link of which is in the description. So if you do want to take part in terms of choosing what films are watched on that and getting into the discussion, we are very active over there, and we'd love to hear more from you. But we are going to stop talking about 2 films per week, just because we found that sometimes we were shackled to having to talk about a certain film, and it didn't cultivate great discussion, and it wasn't just overly fun to talk about certain films that we weren't, that we all didn't really care that much about. So what we're going to be doing instead is we'll have one film club film still. That'll be the first film usually that we'll talk about. And the second film are films that we're actually just going to choose ourselves as like a rota. Maybe down the line, our Patreons might get involved in maybe choosing some films. But for now, me, Chris, and Zach, we're just going to choose on a week-by-week basis. Zach was up this week in terms of what film he chose. That'll be the second film that we discussed today. And then we're just going to rotate it around. We are going to be going back to Collection Corner full-time. So Collection Corner will be back in every episode. But don't worry, still plenty of interviews that are going to be coming your way in 2022. We've just decided to have those as their own freestanding episodes, just so that we're not shackled by how much time we're spending during our interviews. Sometimes we'd love to talk to people for an hour, 2 hours, and we're kind of thinking, it's going to make the whole episode run way too long. So we're just trying to unshackle ourselves, I think you guys would agree, just making things a little bit looser, a little bit more fun, and just giving ourselves a bit of breathing room when it comes to interviews and things like that. So yeah, just wanted to get that out of the way pretty quick before we get into our first film for the discussion. Just before we do, it's the 2nd of January when we're recording. Chris and Zach, what were your first films of 2022? What did you watch yesterday, if you watched anything yesterday?
I figured I would start on a good thing, and I thought it was kind of funny. My first film of 2021 was Run. It was by the same guy who did the movie Searching from a couple years ago. So this time I decided to watch Blade Runner for 2022. Start off well. Haven't seen it in probably over a decade. So it was fun to go back.
You can do Run Lola Run next year.
That's a good idea. I have that on my shelf and I haven't watched it yet.
And then I think Bruce Campbell's in a movie called Running Time.
I had not heard of that, but I'm going to add it.
You'd have to do Silent Running as well by
yes.
What was his name? Lawrence Kasdan. Is that him?
Yeah.
Did he do Silent Running, or am I making that up?
I'm glad I'm going to be able to keep that up. Like, I can just keep making run films, the first one for everyone. I do want to note my last film of the year was Inside. So on my Letterboxd, on my stats, it was basically just said Run Inside. I was pretty proud of that.
Sorry, I was wrong. Silent Running is Douglas Trumbull. He did the special effects for 2001: A Space Odyssey. So there you go. Stars Bruce Dern.
Yeah.
So Silent Running.
My first one was Bronson. And
how convenient.
Yeah, I barely got it in because we have family in town, and anyways, but that was my first one.
Nice. I watched Jean Renoir's The River yesterday.
Nice.
Looks gorgeous and it has some nice thematic stuff in it, but I should have known not to watch a film about British imperialists because it clouded my judgment on everything else. So I should have known it was going to happen, but hey ho, it was okay. So the first film then that we're going to talk about is a film that kind of blew up when it got released in 2019, and over the last 2 years, as it got sort of slowly released around the world through various services, it's become a cult hit. Probably is going to become like a major sort of cult film in the next sort of 10 years or so. It's a Brazilian film from 2019, co-directed by Kleber Mendonça Filho and Juliano Dornelles, and it's called Bacurau. I'm sure listeners, if you're anyway tuned in to the world cinema scene or the art house scene, you would have at least heard of this film because it's been very hard to ignore it as it's been slowly making its way across the world. Um, First off the bat, then, Chris, I know that you had seen this film quite a while ago. Zach, did you? How long ago has it been since you saw Baccarat? Because I know that you had seen it before as well.
I believe Chris had mentioned it on a Any Other Business, and I'm pretty sure I watched it right after that, if my
Okay.
memory serves correctly.
So I have the freshest memory of the three of us then, because I had been meaning to watch it for a long time because it came on to Mubi. I remember distinctly it came on to Mubi here in Ireland in the summer of 2020. And then when it came onto the Criterion channel earlier I nearly said earlier this year. When it came onto the Criterion channel in 2021, they advertised it as a world streaming premiere. And I thought to myself, you lying bastards. That's not true. That's just simply not true. But yeah, I've been meaning to watch it for a long time, and yeah, this film is super fun. Does anyone have any initial thoughts they want to jump in with for
Well, just
Baccarat?
in terms of like kind of some history on this, it's cool that I'm really glad we're talking about it now because do you remember when we spoke with Kino Lorber, they also said like they specifically called out Bacurau as a film that he had worked on, and like he was working with Mendonça Filho to get a lot of the special features together and stuff like that. So it's come up on this podcast a few different times. So I'm so glad we're getting a chance to talk about it. It's They Shoot Pictures has it as 10/5/87, which is pretty impressive for a film that came out in 2019. There's not even really a lot of films from 2019 on here. That means that basically as soon as it came out, people started putting it on their top 100 lists, which is great.
Yeah, it's impressive, and I'm sure that number will probably go down and down and down as the years go by because it's a very impressive film. I realized I never gave a quick synopsis for those who haven't seen it. Basically, just the quick IMDb synopsis of this film is: after the death of her grandmother, Teresa comes home to her matriarchal village in a near future Brazil to find a succession of sinister events that mobilizes all of its residents.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went into this film near blind. I didn't really know what to expect other than violence because I just knew that there was a lot of sort of violence that happened in the film. I know that you guys had specifically mentioned it's very sort of similar to a John Carpenter sort of genre film. I definitely feel that it has sort of neo-Western vibes to it. It has obviously that sort of action, revenge, but even like a sci-fi tinge. It has so much stuff going on. It's a really, really cool, well-constructed film. Has lots of different characters as well. You don't just follow the one person. There's a lot going on in the film. It's a very colorful film in terms of its characterization and different sort of storylines going here and there. It's definitely a film that I know you guys didn't rewatch it when we had it in the film club, which is understandable. I usually skip those as well, but I feel like it's definitely a film that you could just watch over and over and sort of pick up on different nuances every time. Even though it's not like a heady art film or anything like that, there's just a lot of different characters and subplots and stuff that happen throughout the film.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and what I like is I think, and this is such a tough one to talk about because I think the first thing I'd like to tell anyone is I think it's more fun when you don't really know anything about it. Like you just kind of go in and watch it because the way the movie unfolds itself is you don't really know what kind of movie it's going to be. I mean, at one point you think it might be an alien movie and all these other sort of ideas. So it is one that it's so easy to recommend, but it's almost like this worry too that I'm gonna like that you can. It's easy to ruin the experience for someone as well because it's just kind of fun to watch unfold.
Yeah, I completely agree there. I'm glad I went in like practically blind. I say practically blind because I read the Google description for the film before going in, and since watching it, I've discovered the Google description is completely and utterly false. Nothing about that is correct. So I technically went in blind because I went in expecting a completely other movie based on how Google described it. Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I knew practically nothing about it. Watching it, the sort of shocking events unfold, and they are shocking things that happen in this film are quite shocking, especially like one particular scene, which I know a lot of people will be quite shocked by. But there's a lot of stuff that really just goes out of left field, little twists and turns along the way. In terms of now narratively, or in terms of like content, they're not really similar, but just in terms of like a film that I had a similar experience watching was one that wasn't part of the film club, but in our Discord, it became a very talked about film that was Save the Green Planet. I don't know if you guys remember that one. Did you guys watch that when everyone was talking about it? Did you
I
watch it,
regret
Zach?
so much not being able to watch it because I
Man,
can't
that's
find it anywhere now.
wild.
Yeah, it never ends up on another streaming service. I'm like,
Like it's nothing like Bacurau in terms of content, in terms of plot. It's nothing like Bacurau, but in just terms of like being brought on a wild fucking ride, it's exactly like it. You know, you just don't really know where it's going. Um, and I felt like that with Bacurau. You know, it's a kind of film. It is like an old genre film in a way. You just sort of sit back and just let it happen to you. You know, let the twists happen. Just become engrossed in the storyline and just sort of not really know or care where it's going. Just be very fucking entertained the whole way through because that's what this film does. It brings you on a wild ride. It keeps you engrossed, keeps your attention the whole way through.
So just quickly on Bacurau, and by the way, I totally agree on Save the Green Planet in the context of how you're describing it. I don't think people sitting down for both would draw a lot of comparisons between the two. But as far as what you said of just kind of like about 20 minutes in or something, you're like, okay, you know what? Like I'm just gonna have fun with this one. Let's just see where it goes. I think it's definitely in that very same style. I I feel like okay, so I love this movie a lot, right? But I feel like we have to kind of set the atmosphere of the film. I feel like the atmosphere is so important here, right? Because it in a lot of ways it's a very modern, like kind of rural town, right? There's people are driving cars, like they go in and they're listening to like modern music in the on the stereo, but it just the town feels so like dusty and remote, right? It's like right out of the gate you can tell that something is off just in the way that there's like a panic to their because they you see them driving to the town, right?
yeah,
um and you just immediately get this vibe that like something is wrong. And so I think some of the fun part of the first act of the film is trying to figure out kind of what's wrong or what's going on or what's different about this town. Why is that grandma coming out in the funeral and like and being so aggressive, right? Like you just kind of get this sense of like something is different here. And I was nervous because a lot of times when films set it up in that way, it can either be a great payoff or it can be a terrible payoff. And that was one of my favorite pieces of the film is they set it up in such a way where you're like intrigued in the first act. You're like, I don't really know what's going on, but something's off. And then as that film kind of rolls on and you meet Udo Kier and you meet some of the townsfolk and you learn more of the history, you're just like drawn in more and more. You're like, oh, how's this going to end up? So that's probably my favorite thing to talk about with Bacurau.
just to kind of add a little bit to that, a little bit to what you're saying. One thing that I think I'm not going to say modern films. This isn't a thing that plagues all modern films, but I do think it's something you see a little bit less of now. Is the thing I like about Bacurau is you get just dropped in a pretty well defined and a world that feels lived in.
Yeah.
There's great world building. I mean, there is nothing. It never feels like I think there's an issue where sometimes you watch it and it just feels like everything's to serve the plot. If it's not there, it's very streamlined, and a lot of times that's because that's expensive to do. But you look at a lot of genre films, that's so important to be able to believe the events that happened is just how detailed and textured the whole world feels. There's a lot that goes on, like you mentioned in the first act. Probably the one that sticks out to me the most is I can't remember. Is he a mayor? The politician that comes in that everyone
Yeah.
despises. And just little things like that. Like, how much does he add? I mean, some, not a ton, but he adds some to the film. But it's just like little things like that that just kind of give this texture to the world that makes it feel so lived in.
Yes. And there's not a ton of exposition, they just kind of drop you in it, right? And you just sort of have to catch up, which I love too.
Yeah, because obviously these people are going to be talking about like there's not going to be someone in that town that's confused who the politician is. So you're just having to kind of pick it up. Like, okay, what are they talking about? Why is he here? What is he doing? And it trusts the audience in that regard.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's certainly not a film that talks down to you. You don't even really realize it's near future until much later in the film. When you see, technologies and stuff that, that certain characters begin to use. Like, you could be forgiven. Like, there's a lot of anachronistic stuff in this film. You could be forgiven, for believing that it could be set in the 70s, it could be set in modern day, just because the town itself is so sort of stuck in time. Nobody sort of dresses weird. They all sort of dress in just normal clothing. The town looks normal. Everyone has sort of, normal cars. You'd be forgiven for not sort of thinking this is technically set in the future until what happens later.
I don't know if you guys have seen It Follows.
Yeah, yeah. They
They
do
do
that too.
something
It's
very
cool.
similar to that.
Yeah,
Use
for
old
sure.
70s cars, use futuristic tech. People wear modern clothing, and I think that's I think it speaks, especially when you talk about something. There's obviously a political nature to this film. I'm sure we'll get into, but it kind of highlights that idea of the time period doesn't matter. When it happened doesn't matter because these type of events can happen and have happened at plenty of points.
Mhm.
Maybe not
Yeah.
to the point where there's alien drones, but similar.
I just quickly on that point, I want to mention this because I think it's interesting to look at the main. I guess there's two directors to the film, but the guy that gets called out seemingly more is Kleber Mendonça Filho, and I thought it was interesting. Right before Bacurau, a few years before, he made a movie called Aquarius, and just listen to this. It's only like 3 sentences, but just listen to this description. Clara, a 65-year-old widow and retired music critic, was born into a wealthy family. She's the last resident of Aquarius, a 2-story building built in the 40s. All the neighboring apartments have been acquired, and there's plans for her building as well. But she wants to stay there until she dies, so she's going to engage in a cold war of sorts with the company. So I feel like this guy Mendoza Fila, I feel like he's really big into playing on people being taken advantage of by faceless companies or by these kind of maybe more relevant to Bacurau, maybe these kind of there's like this what's the most dangerous game kind of element to this story, right, where people are coming in and hunting people in a town, and he's like, and it's these forces that are larger than the communities that they're part of, and sort of how the communities respond and fight against these larger forces that are coming in and trying to control them. That seems to be a theme for him, and I love that he's choosing this. I love that he chose this genre and this style of filmmaking to kind of tell that story, because I think it plays so well into his larger political message.
And just to you know talk a little bit on the political thing, that's something I think when you have people like Paul Verhoeven, who've obviously worked in genre pictures, who have, I guess all of them have exclusively had political messages. You've had George A. Romero, which is almost always had political messages, but it was a little bit more buried. I think that's always fascinating. I think that's something you don't see as much now with a lot of genre pictures. And I think that's why this movie feels so refreshing, is because it has that aesthetic. There's obviously something political you can take from it. It's there. It's not even hard to dig for. But you can also just completely ignore it and not even think for 2 seconds about it, and it would still work as a film. And I think that's really fascinating. I think that's what makes it enjoyable as well, is even though he does have something to say, he's not going to pretend that everyone wants to listen to it. And I think that's kind of a fun way to do genre films in general.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I just had this idea. We're saying the term genre a lot. Do you think it's worth defining what we mean by genre film? I have no concept of like outside of, you know, because I love them and I know Zach, we've talked about how much you love them, but like, is that a widely used term? Would everybody know what it means by genre film?
I guess it's, that's one of those definitions where I don't know. It's almost like pornography. Like I can't define it, but I can tell you it is when I see it. And I mean, I'm sure maybe one of you guys has a better definition than I could for it.
I always find it a funny term because like every film has a genre.
Right.
Genre is not in itself a genre, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I suppose like when we like on this podcast, and I suppose when a lot of filmy people, when we talk about genre film, we're more so talking about something that's not a straight-laced drama, or maybe like, but then I suppose technically maybe comedy films would be called a genre film. Well, when we talk about genre film, I suppose we kind of talk about either something culty, like maybe exploitation films, action films, stuff that maybe kind of gets underappreciated by critics and academies and things like that. It's hard to put a finger on it for sure. Like you said, like if I said this film is a genre film, I know what to expect, but not really be able to put my finger exactly on a definition.
Yeah, for me, it's always been the big thing for me has always been like it's like a nice way of saying a film that has a lot of kind of exploitation elements in it, right? So it's like it's sort of a term that you would use at like a nice dinner party to describe watching a bunch of villagers get slaughtered by Udo Kier and some hunters, right? Or like if you're talking about like Italian films from the 70s and you don't want to say like movies with a lot of tits and ass, you say genre film, right? Like I think that's kind of how I hear it used the most, is people
So
that are like trying to kind of draw out the artful elements of these exploitation films
make
and
it more
not
tasteful.
work it exactly, not just focus on the fact that it has nudity in it or it has like crazy, like I just saw Patrick Still Lives, and there's a scene where there's a harp that goes in through kind of the bottom of the woman and out through her head, and it's done very slowly, and
Jesus.
it's extremely disturbing. And you can either focus on the fact that there's like that kind of stuff in the movie, or you can call it like this crazy genre film that I saw, right? And it's a way of like making it more for polite conversation.
And there's listening to people who are filmmakers within it. I always, when you talk about like having like a bunch of nudity in the film, it reminds me a little bit like what Roger Corman, who obviously is probably the biggest name when it comes to genre filmmaking, arguably. He's talk about how he did nudity, and I think you may have been the one who told me, Chris, that now that I'm thinking about it. But it was the idea that you put like nudity at the beginning, you put nudity at the end, and just a little bit in the middle, and it gives people this idea that there's more into it than that. And I think there is, I think that speaks a lot to the expectation, like you're talking about. Like this is what people expect. Doesn't mean we can't give them more, but we have to at least do that to get them, to get into the door in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there is a lot of artful elements within these movies, right? Like, would you say that Bacurau is only good because of the kills? Well, no, right? Like, there's so much going on. And it kind of, I think using a term other than a violent term or a disturbing term, just it like frees up the mind to even focus on the other stuff in a way, which is good.
Yeah, it's kind of like we've talked about Friday 13th. Well, maybe only our Patreons have heard that, but we've talked about Friday 13th quite a bit, and I think that's a frustration we've all kind of talked about. Where it's a type of film where a lot of people do go into those for the kills, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're looking for maybe something a little bit more or something to add to that, it can be kind of frustrating. And I think that's I think that hinders Friday 13th as a franchise anyway because that is the expectation. It is you
I
know
suppose that's a good one to point out because I wouldn't call Friday the 13th a genre film.
really
You
you wouldn't.
know, no, I would just call it a slasher film because that's all it's really good for. I don't see anything artful about Friday the 13th.
So you would say genre film does have to have like an artistic element to it.
Now that I'm thinking about it, I wouldn't like, until we had this conversation. I wouldn't. But now that I'm kind of thinking about it, when we say genre film as opposed to say slasher film, to me it implies maybe like we said something maybe a bit more tasteful, a bit more artful, rather than just the bruteness of it all. So like Friday the 13th, I don't really see much artful with that. It's a slasher movie. But then say The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, I would call that maybe a genre film
Mhm.
because yeah, it has violence and murder and stuff like that, but there's a lot that's in there that's also very artful.
Okay,
So
that's kind of
maybe
an
for
interesting way to
me,
think
for
about it.
me,
Yeah.
maybe that's where the line is. Now, look, it's this is something that's not written in stone anywhere, so it's going to be different for everyone, I suppose, isn't it? But it's just when you mentioned Friday the 13th, I kind of thought to myself, I was like, you know what? I wouldn't call that a genre film. Just if I was talking casually, I would never say it was a genre film, and maybe that's where the line is for me personally.
Right. And I mean, obviously there are I would say you since I know Halloween is in your favorites, you would say there are slasher films that I guess could cross into that genre film, but it's like not all slashers are within that realm.
Yeah, something like Halloween, or we watched Black Christmas recently for the film club. There's a lot in there that's artful that outside of just being about, oh, we're going to go see some murders, we might see some tits, great. Outside of that, there is artful remit with these films,
Hmm.
whereas I don't personally give care too much about the Friday the 13th movies. I think they were just there as a cash grab to make money, and that's fine. I've seen them all. They're at the very least they are entertaining. I'm not saying I despise them or anything like that, but I don't think they have much artful merit. Whereas something like maybe Halloween, the first Halloween, and Black Christmas, and something like maybe even the first like Nightmare on Elm Street film, I just think they have that little bit extra substance to them that maybe pushes them into more of can be maybe taken a bit more seriously as
Hmm.
art compared to Friday the 13th, if that makes sense.
Except
Yeah, yeah.
I'll agree with you unless but I think Jason X takes the franchise in a good direction, right?
Exactly. They took it
I'm
a
just
step
talking
above.
about the first Friday the 13th here. Sequels
Okay.
and stuff. We'd be here for several hours trying to dissect which Friday the 13th film has artful merit or not. But yeah, I'm just talking about the original one. That's all I'm really talking about here.
But switching gears back to Bacurau, I did find a interview since it was heavily influenced by John Carpenter and a lot of films from that RogerEbert.com actually did interview Carpenter after this film came out and did ask him about it. And I'll read an expert because I do think it's pretty interesting to hear them talk about it. Described in Polygon Review as the best John Carpenter movie John Carpenter didn't make, Bacurau is forthright in its debt to horror maestro, even to I shouldn't have even agreed to read. I can't read when it's pressure. Even if it's compact and stylish exploitation of a single setup for genre kicks. A fictional school in its central village carries the name of one of John Carpenter, while the film's widescreen cinescope photography and heady mixture of split doipers, I don't even know what that is, slow dissolves and wipes recall 70s and 80s thrillers like Assault on Precinct 13. But the film's most fascinating callback to the filmmaker is the direct use of Carpenter's gunslinging-esque Night off his first Law-themed record in a key sequence. Say this again, Bacurau says Carpenter, when asked about the film, I've never heard of it, don't know it, don't remember this, but they probably got the rights to use the music, so God bless them, they had to pay. He agreed to add the film to his watch list.
Carpenter's great.
But I do think that brought up a good point of it. Obviously, Night is a big part of that film. It's in a it is in a big sequence of that film. But yeah, I think it is in Panavision aspect ratio. I haven't watched it, so I'd have to go back and see. But I think that it is in a Panoscope ratio. I'm actually
Yeah, I'm just wondering if I can find that easily.
It was definitely it was very widescreen. I do remember that.
Yeah, it is a wide film for sure. Usually IMDb has that information. Technical aspects.
239 one, yep.
239 one, yeah, just found it.
Oh, so, yep, and the process was Panavision, according to IMDb.
Nice.
I think I don't want to go too far away from Panavision. I don't have much to say on the technical side of films. That's one area I need to kind of buff up on, I guess, a little bit. I just think that it just quickly, like, to go back to one thing we were talking about earlier, is I thought about one of the reasons I love this so much. I think that the best kind of films are the ones where, like, if you take the central idea of this town being targeted by a group of killers, right, just for sport, and you were to take that away of specifically that it's like if you kind of remove the fact of the fact that Udo Kier is like organizing these trips and they're going in and they're killing them. If you take the concept up 1 degree higher and say that there are wealthy people targeting poor communities, like the message stays the same, right? I don't want to get into a big political discussion, but like that's certainly a topic that comes up a lot in different forums, right? And there's certainly a lot of strong opinions on like the wealthy taking advantage of the poor communities in this world, right? And to take that central idea, which gets people so charged up. I mean, personally, I feel rightfully so, but like it gets people so charged up, and to paint the brutality of the way that these folks are targeted by politicians, and to put it in a light like this that shows how brutal it can be and how harmful it can be, I think is where the power of this film is for me. The fact that it can so easily switch back and forth between what you're actually seeing on screen and the metaphor.
Yeah, and I think one of the elements that really highlights that the best, and it caught me off guard the first time I watched it, was when the film switches to English.
Yeah.
Like we're what, with an hour? We're using Portuguese is my guess. I'm going to assume it's Portuguese. And then suddenly it's almost jarring. And I think that works so well to its advantage because I mean, yeah, we're going to talk about that. You can also bring up the colonialism aspect to that area, and I mean the Americas in general. To have that sudden switch in language, it's such an interesting jarring feel to do that I didn't expect it to. You'd almost feel like, oh, I'm excited to not have to read subtitles here, but at the same time, you're kind of like, oh, this is kind of uncanny in a way.
I love that because you can look at it from two sides of this coin. So obviously, it's a Brazilian film. Its themes are very central to the political climate in Brazil, and their history with colonialism and everything like that. So, when you're a Brazilian watching this film, and it changes to English when all the villains are discussing, it's kind of like when we watch like a World War II film, and it goes to like a scene, and all the Germans are talking in German, and it's just so weird for then to be an English-speaking person to be put in that seat. Where it's like the best way I can describe it is, right, there's this comedy series that's from Britain called That Mitchell and Webb Look. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. The two comedians, they made another show called Peep Show that's a lot more popular that you might have heard of. Yeah. So the two guys that are in Peep Show, Mitchell and Webb, they have their own comedy sketch series where they just do sketches and stuff like that. And there's one where they're German soldiers and they have their helmets on, and they're looking at like the skulls on their helmets, and they're just like, "Are we the baddies?"
I know that one. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty memed, and it's really just like that's the kind of reaction you have, and when you're watching, Bacurau, and you've been watching it in Portuguese, and then suddenly all the villains are there chatting in English. You're like, oh shit, we're the bad guys. Okay. It's a weird thing to be put in because obviously if you just watch American films or British films or whatever, the bad guys are always foreign. It's always a German or a Russian or something. So to be sort of have that shoe be put on the other foot it's fun, but also kind of like, ah, shit. Okay, I'm gonna feel bad now.
That's great. I'm looking. I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole. One of the producers of this film, I want to watch this guy now. So he's a guy. He's from Tunisia. His name is Said Ben Said, and the film that he did after this was Paul Verhoeven's Benedetta. And I want to make sure I'm right on this. Oh, never mind. Yeah. So he did Bacurau and then Benedetta, and he's getting deeply involved in these kind of foreign films, financing foreign movies made outside the U.S., I guess. And I just want to kind of follow this guy because I know that people say Benedetta is kind of a pretty bad
That's
movie.
Satan's Alley from
Sorry?
Tropic Thunder. Is that basically what that is? That the one that's basically that?
Oh man, sorry, I'm trying to remember. It's the one about Benedetta is the one about the lesbian nun who's like, it's
Yeah,
very
yeah.
scandalous.
It reminds me of the Robert Downey Jr., Tobey Maguire like trailer from Tropic Thunder where they're like gay priest, and that's all I've thought about ever since that movie's been announced.
That's awesome. Sorry, I like Tropic Thunder. I can't remember it off the top of my head. Sorry, but yeah, people are kind of saying that Paul Verhoeven. I mean, same thing he gets in every movie he makes. They're like, it's too extreme and all this kind of stuff. It's a very Paul Verhoeven movie apparently. But yeah, I'm just kind of curious to follow this producer now. If he's getting in with Bacurau and now he's getting in with Verhoeven. I wonder if he has. I'd just be curious to see what he comes up with next. That's kind of a cool. We don't really talk about producers a lot, but sometimes it's fun to track them because they're the ones that are really making these films happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, usually when you're talking about like different genre films, really the two that get brought up, especially, are Blumhouse and A24. They're producers and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, anytime it highlights, there's obviously other people working in the scenes to find their own type of style that Blum and A24 have. So that's probably worth looking into, honestly.
Yeah, exactly.
Was there any? Was there anything that you guys had issues with the movie, just that you can think of?
Not off the top of my head. Well, there's one little thing that gets into spoiler regions. So I don't know if we want to do spoilers because I feel like this film is just you're going to enjoy it so much more if you don't know what the fuck is going to happen. So I'd be happy.
I agree.
I'd be happy if you guys maybe clear it up. It was just more of a confusion over a plot point rather than an actual issue with the film, if that makes sense. So I'm okay not talking about it on the podcast.
Well, I mean, I'm curious now.
Okay, spoiler warning.
Spoiler warning.
Spoiler warning. I'll put timestamps in the description. Why did Udo Kier start killing his own people at the end? I never got that. I didn't get that.
I'm sitting here trying to remember.
I just thought maybe I missed something, but I couldn't think of it.
I'm wondering if it's just something that's up for interpretation of the type of person he is, like whether.
But it's not like he turned on the whole thing. Like, he was still happy to try and kill the townspeople. Like, I thought maybe he had turned heel for a minute, and maybe he was going to be a good guy after his sort of confrontation with the new sort of matriarch of the village. I thought maybe he had turned heel or something, but then he didn't. So,
I mean, the only thing I can think of is maybe it kind of shows not everyone is in for obviously a lot of these people are in it for maybe racist reasons or things like that, and then it's like this is how these type of people event because you have someone like Udo Kier who may not have any racist undertones. He just likes to kill people, which I mean isn't better, but it's this idea of how maybe you grow these type of numbers when you can just get psychopaths like that to be a part of it.
Fair enough.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say as well. I think he's just if you're thinking about this again as what happens in the movie as well as the metaphor, I think there's some people that are just out for blood, right? And they're kind of enabling. A lot of these tourists that come in, they're not presented as purely evil. This is more of just a game for them, right? I mean, which is super fucked up. But this is just like a game for them to go like hunt down these people. But Kier's the one who's organizing it, right? He might have a different motive. He might just like the chaos or like the savagery of it.
You guys are gonna make me quote Batman now.
Do
Some
it.
men just some men just like to watch the world burn.
That's awesome.
There it is.
There. I mean, when in doubt, just put that motivation on anyone in a movie.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay,
Like
thank you
Madden.
for clearing that up.
Hey, welcome back, and so excited in early 2022 to do our first collection corner. I want to focus on some movies that I've ordered. You know, it's interesting. Every company kind of, you know, they talk about, oh, next year is going to be even brighter and better, and it's a marketing ploy. And if I was in their position, I'd do the same thing. But holy moly, like some of the releases that have come out as of January 1 are so great. So I'm just going to quickly highlight a couple of things that I've ordered. So we haven't talked a lot about Shinya Tsukamoto here, but I love him. He's a wild man. He's most famous for Tetsuo the Iron Man, and everything he does is just kind of nightmarish, but he's also very artistic with it. And Mondo Macabro is doing the North American release of Hiruko the Goblin, which is probably the most famous image, is like a spider with a woman's head on it. And it's just it's very just full of nightmares, and I'm so excited this is getting a North American release. So that's one that I have ordered. The Vinegar Syndrome. So we have to talk about this one, I think. So our first, I hope this is true. Our first interview was with Deaf Crocodile, isn't that right? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
And they are now at a partner label with Vinegar Syndrome.
Nice, that's cool.
Yeah. So January they announced their first movie, and they're gonna be a partner label with Vinegar, which makes me really happy because basically it means they're gonna be selling out of their stuff, and they're gonna be in business for a long time. And we all know how much we love those guys. So very happy for Craig and Dennis. And the movie they're putting out is The Unknown Man of Shandagore, which I've been following them on Instagram, and they've been releasing some of the stills from that restoration. It's awesome. I don't know much about the movie, to be honest, but the work they did on restoring it is beautiful. The only other, just quickly, I'll talk about Dead Heat. Does that name ring a bell?
Kinda.
That 80s zombie cop comedy.
Oh, probably not.
Zach, I'm wanting you to say yes here. Have you seen it?
I have not seen it. I did see it get posted up at the first of the year, though, so I'm interested.
I'm so excited about it. The old one was a Anchor Bay release, and it has Treat Williams, who is like this kind of, you know, C-level action star, and Joe Piscopo playing the
And Vincent Price.
Yeah. It's great. So it's very goofy, but I'm so glad it's getting a nice release. And then just very quickly, then I'll say the Grindhouse, not video, not the store, but Grindhouse releasing they don't put out a lot of movies, but they came out very strong, and they're putting out a biography of Rudy Ray Moore, which should be interesting, but they're also putting out this meat cleaver edition of Death Game, and it looks awesome. Have y'all seen the stills from this release yet?
Let me actually go take a look. I knew I saw that they released something, but I didn't actually take a close look at it.
It looks really great.
And what is it called again?
Death Game.
Death Game.
So these are all instant buys from me.
March 8th.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I did see that picture running. Oh, that's actually really nice.
Yeah. They're one of the ones. Grindhouse releasing is. I wish they would put out more releases because every one of them is stellar. But it's a beautiful looking 2-disc kind of Blu-ray set, and it has a meat cleaver keychain that's coming with the set, which is great. I might actually use it as my keychain.
You know, I recently watched their Big Gun Down about
Yeah,
within the last month. I'd had it forever and I never sat down and watched it. Yeah, I was surprised how like good that movie looked, like quality wise.
it's great, right?
Little
Um,
awkward to watch because you pretty much have to choose between dubbed or having Lee Van Cleef dubbed, and it's like that's kind of a tough decision because there's no like one where you can do both, where it's just either completely dubbed or it's in a different language. And with Italian spaghetti westerns, it's awkward to figure that out anyway.
yeah,
Still a great
maybe,
release.
maybe one day we can do a separate discussion around kind of Italian films from the 60s and 70s, because that's the audio from those movies is the most interesting thing to me. How they would fly people in from like Germany and the US and London and put them on set and basically just say, talk in your native tongue and we'll fix it in post. And like, what a crazy.
Yeah, and like there's no natural sounds because half of them didn't have sound equipment on set, so they're just making it up.
Yeah, exactly. But anyways, so for fans of genre films, as we've been kind of talking about, the year starting off with a bang, and yeah, that's my collection corner. What about y'all?
So from one, super unknown genre filmmaker to another, I've ordered the 80th anniversary edition of Citizen Kane.
Hey.
Yeah, I went with the 80th anniversary one from Warner Brother, which is the Region B release as opposed to the Criterion. Like nothing to do with the Criterion one. It still looks really cool. It was just more for convenience. Like this one was like about €40, whereas it would have cost me a lot more to get the Criterion one. This one is, just as much good stuff in terms of special features and really nice packaging. And before you come at me, like I'm not a K hater. I actually quite like. I'm probably one of in the minority of people who actually quite like the Citizen Kane Criterion artwork. So it's definitely nothing to do with that. It was just more convenient, and it looks like a really, really great set anyway in terms of like special features. As these cool like a booklet, it has nice card art and posters, all the nice little stuff you like to get when you buy your special sort of collector editions.
Yeah.
It is a 4K release. I believe it also has a Blu-ray, but it's not the end of the world. Yeah, it does has a Blu-ray as well. I am hoping to go 4K in 2022. I ordered a 4K TV that arrived just at the end of last week. It arrived on Thursday. So my TV is now upscaled for 4K. I just need to get an actual 4K player, just trying to decide if I just get a 4K player or if I maybe save a little bit more and just get an Xbox Series X, because I did used to be a bit of a gamer, not really in recent years, but I kind of like the idea of maybe getting the new Xbox so that it also can play 4K discs. That's my aim for 2022 is to get on the 4K train, and no better way to start than with Citizen Kane, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm actually going to wait and see, when you get some pictures of the set, because that's actually the one I'm thinking about getting because I am not a fan of the Giant K, but but I'm interested in it. It looks like Warner Brothers did a pretty good with that set, actually.
Yeah, it looks like something they put a lot of work into. It wasn't sort of half-assed thrown together or anything like. It looks like they put it out to directly compete with Criterion's.
Yeah, and I think who'd you order it from? Zavi or Amazon or?
Yeah, I just got it on Amazon. It'll be here during the week. So I don't have it in my hands right now. By the time the episode goes live, I'll have it. But yeah, I ordered from Amazon yesterday, and they say it should be here by Friday. But knowing them, it'll probably be a little bit quicker. Probably be Wednesday or Thursday.
If the studios represent Udo Kier and a team of savages that are killing movies, killing the physical media industry, then the boutiques are like the village of Bacurau that is rising up and forcing the elite to rethink how they do physical media. And I love it. I love that like this was not put out by a boutique, but this was put out by the studio. That makes me so happy.
I was over at a secondhand store yesterday, and I swear there's a new edition of Citizen Kane, I think every 5 years. Because I think there was like a 70th anniversary while I was there. I think there was a 75th. I was like, they just will milk this to death, which is fun to think about because how Citizen Kane wasn't beloved when it released. It had, it earned its reputation years later. But I just think it's funny. I was like, that's one that they will just release. I mean, we'll get an 85th anniversary, I'm sure.
Oh,
But
it's completely understandable as well. Like I was surprised that Criterion were even able to wrangle the rights to it. Like I remember, like those threads on the Criterion Reddit that happen like 7 times a day where people ask for like films they want to release, and people will ask for Citizen Kane, and I was thinking that'll never happen. Why would Warner Brothers give up the rights to Citizen Kane? It's like it's like just one of those films that you just wouldn't release the rights to. Like The Godfather or Pulp Fiction. They're just too easy to make money off. So I was surprised the Criterion, got it in the first place.
Yeah, and I'm almost wondering if there was just a beneficial thing because I know Warner does their own restorations in house, but they're kind of hit and miss. Like they either have like really great restorations or they're very disappointing. And I almost wonder if they just went ahead and outsourced it with
Mm,
Criterion to do it with Janus Films to do it. But I mean, I'm just speculating at that point.
yeah.
I actually didn't know. So is Citizen Kane Warner Brothers?
Well, I
Yes.
assume it is if Warner
Yeah, I
Brothers
mean,
have
I'm assuming
released
they're
it
the ones putting it
here,
out.
because
Yeah,
obviously it was
yeah, yeah, yeah.
RKO originally, so it's whoever bought out RKO and they went under.
This is a
Uh,
great question to ask the George Eastman interview we have coming up because they have the Warner Brothers catalog. So that might be, I guess, as soon as we get that interview scheduled, we'll have to remember to ask about Citizen Kane, see what he knows about it.
yeah.
Adam, edit out that part I just said about their restorations.
um, yeah, it'll be interesting to ask at least from the rights wise, like kind of how that got split up. But I mean, to be fair, for Christmas I just got the new Evil Dead box set that came out with Evil Dead 1, 2, and the TV show Ash versus
Hmm.
the Evil Dead. Have y'all seen this Best Buy exclusive that came out?
I heard about it, yeah, because it
Mhm.
was like, it's not really a complete set if you're missing two of the four films.
Yeah, yeah, rightfully so. People are pissed about that, but that's another one that just like Citizen Kane gets a release every 5 years, pretty much on the nose.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if Sam Raimi's involved in them at this point. I think he just like I already approved the master, so do whatever you want with it.
As well, just send me checks.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I'll go. So this year, my main focus is I mentioned to you guys yesterday for everyone at home. I've had a very hourly rate job for the last several years. I did mentoring for a while, which was great money until the cases ran out, and then I had to go to Target, where it's Target. Your payday is change week to week how much you can buy. I have a salary job now, which is fantastic for me, and probably really really bad for me having to get another bookshelf at this point. So one of the things I really wanted to focus on this year is I want to do more with premiums. I have a few. I have a Hacksaw Ridge one. I have the Wailing 7, a few different ones. And just to go big or go home. The first one I'm hoping to get. There's two. I'm gonna get one if I don't get the other. Two I'm really looking at getting. Hopefully I'll have those ordered by today. Is a UHD Club, a Blade Runner, great set. I was describing it to them earlier. I really recommend looking into it. Don't look at the price because it hurts my feelings too. If that doesn't work out, the other one I'm looking at getting is a Doctor Sleep one that came out through Black Barons. I think they're from Taiwan. But yeah, basically, I just at this point, I just want to start focusing more on that. Try to get rid of as many of these blue cases as I can because I really they're like my least favorite part of my collection. So I'm gonna overpay for them not to exist. But that's kind of it for me. I haven't done a whole lot of shopping in the last month because of Christmas. So a lot of the stuff I've gotten has just been kind of cheap stuff I found. Like I found my first Criterion pickup yesterday was Seconds, which I'd never heard of before yesterday, but it sounded pretty good. I don't know if you guys have seen it.
Going with Rock
Frankenheimer.
Hudson, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I haven't seen it. I heard it's wild. It's like a weird sci-fi movie. I
yeah,
heard good
and
things about it.
it was like $15, and I had store credit there, so I was like, I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, no, I heard good things about it. I haven't watched it myself, but from what I've heard about it, I think you'll probably like it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's a Frankenheimer. Yeah, yeah, I was just checking. Yeah, John Frankenheimer. He did. Do you like? Did you ever see The Island of Dr. Moreau?
Yeah, I have seen that.
There you go.
Oh, I didn't realize it was the same guy. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. course, to be fair, he also did 2000s Reindeer Games with Ben Affleck, so he's had a mixed career.
All right, and so as we mentioned before, we're doing a new format where I get to take the brunt of it. So if this completely falls on its face, I already messed it up. It'll be completely my fault. So for the first one, I went with the movie Bronson by Nicholas Winding Refn. A big reason I did want to touch on why I kind of decided to pick this one. One of the things I think one of the reasons we decided to do this is because we all kind of like very different things when it comes to cinema. That's kind of, I think, what makes this successful for us and everything else. So I wanted to pick something that I thought would tick boxes for both Adam and Chris, but probably maybe tick different types of boxes. I think I hoping they ended up enjoying it quite a bit. But to go over what the film is about, the man, the myth, the celebrity, a young man who's sentenced to 7 years in prison for robbing a post office, ends up spending 30 years in solitary confinement. During this time, his own personality is supplanted by his alter ego, Charles Bronson, not to be confused with Death Wish, Charles Bronson. So, what did you guys think? Adam, I know you watched it before Chris did, since I think Chris got to it about 1 a.m. this morning. So, I'll let him collect his thoughts since I'm sure he's tired. So, what do you think?
So Charles Bronson sat at the Corova milk bar with his droogie droogs. No, I'm just joking. Yeah, like this film is awesome. It's extremely fun. It's extremely entertaining, while also being very artful and very introspective. Um, someone had brought up that they had read it was similar to Clockwork Orange, and I totally see that. Hence my little reference to the beginning of Clockwork Orange there. It has a lot of Kubrickian aspects in terms of how it's filmed, its use of music, but this film is just totally unique in terms of how it's presented. By having, you know, the character of Charles Bronson essentially tell his story wearing clown makeup to a stage of imagined people, while essentially sitting in his cell is just such a bold and brilliant creative choice. I don't know much about the man in terms of his real life situation. But if he is as wild and crazed and just bonkers as the film puts out, I'm sure he probably loved it himself if he ever got to see it. But yeah, it was a super fun, super engaging film. That, like you said, it kind of has both aspects of what you're looking for, because it has those genre aspects, the crime, the violence, things like that. But Nicholas Winding Refn, who I know is a bit of a divisive filmmaker, if nothing, his films are absolutely stylish and they're well polished and they're very well put together. And you can absolutely say this about Bronson as well.
I did want to note, since you brought up if he had seen it, I know originally in an interview he had not been able, he was not allowed to see it.
Okay.
But his mother did get to see it, and she really liked it. And he said, what, if she liked it, that's good enough for me. And I think
Brilliant.
I think since then he has seen it. I think he said he liked it. And if you want to know if he's just as crazy, he actually chopped off his mustache and sent it to Tom Hardy.
Wow.
To help him. So he's just that type of guy.
Wow. Yeah, he just seems like a real, just a pure character. Obviously we mentioned earlier the quote from the Joker the quote from Alfred in The Dark Knight about the Joker, about some men just wanting to watch the world burn. Charles Bronson seems very much like that kind of guy as well.
I'm trying to remember what his actual Michael Peterson. Okay, I had to look up what his real name was. Was Michael Peterson?
That was yeah.
Any question about the movie? Let me know. It's very fresh for me.
Yeah, I'm probably the least fresh on this one.
So it's rated as 15/536 on They Shoot Pictures, which I don't really understand how it's that low.
Yeah, that's super low. That's incredibly low. Like I would expect this to have been definitely in the top, 10,000.
I guess it'd be second after Drive within his filmography, because I'm sure Drive is well up there.
Yeah, and I know his Pusher trilogy. I know some people do like those, the ones he made before. Mm-hmm. I think they were in Denmark. I think some people do like those. Yeah. I can't imagine only God Forgives is hanging around the top 20,000.
If you guys never have, he has an interview with William Friedkin, and it's hysterical. because he
Okay.
asked him what he thinks about Only God Forgives. Because William Friedkin asked him, he's like, "Oh, it's a masterpiece." He's like, "It's not," and like William Friedkin just like goes in on him. It's like it is awful.
Oh wow.
That's brilliant. That's so
Oh,
good.
that's awesome. Um, so there, I'm not going to make this as long as it sounds like I am when I start. It's just, but the film to me, as I was kind of watching it, is broken up kind of into three pieces, and they all work for me. Like, there's the macro piece of like, what does a country do with a person like Bronson or like Michael Peterson? Like, we don't really have institutions that are kind of set up to serve people like Michael Peterson. So that's an interesting discussion piece from this. Then I think there's the piece of like just the man himself. Like I think he's changed his name to Charles Salvador because he got super into art, and his art's getting bought. So he wants to reference Salvador Dali now. So he constantly saw himself as like history's greatest something. He just had to find what that something was. And turns out he was a pretty good brawler.
I do want to, go on your point about what does society do with that? I think, I'm going to come from this from kind of I used to work corrections for a few years. And you also have to ask the question of how much of it is their own fault, the way he ended up. He was dangerous in his own way. He committed crimes, but was he ever more than a petty criminal that they made worse? And I think that's really, I guess, a big point of what the film's trying to bring up too. How much does I'd say the state here, but I don't know how they divide things up in England, but how much is they to blame for how he becomes? Because I mean, he spent what 30 some years in prison for a 7-year sentence.
No, it was 30. I just remember the stat because I was curious. It was 34 years in prison, 30 years in solitary confinement.
Yeah, and I mean that's obviously times have changed. In the U.S., you could never put someone in solitary confinement for that long because it has like it can give you like serious mental problems, like
Oh
to be
yeah,
alone and to be that, or the only person you see is the person who hands you food every day. Yeah, it's not it's not healthy to say the least.
yeah. And just I want to talk about that, but then quickly, kind of because you mentioned that, the third thing for me was just this discussion on mental health and like how there's so much discussion in this movie around mental health without any specific call out to it. But as he's on stage and he starts to, as the movie goes on, one thing I think it does well is that like you see him the moment where he gets this Charles Bronson alter ego from the promoter, the fight promoter, when he's released that first time. So then his alter ego starts to make sense, but then you see it just you kind of watch the descent, I guess, into worse and worse mental health, and I think that's an interesting piece. So there might even be more layers to the film, but the fact that it kind of balances all three of those without over explaining any of them is one thing I really loved about the film.
Yeah, like I think it ends up being one of the reasons why Bronson's my favorite of Refn's stuff is because it feels the least self indulgent of what he's done, and I say that as a Refn fan. I really do like his stuff, but this is a movie he really could have probably justified a longer runtime, and I'm glad he didn't. Like it's very quick. It's 92 minutes or something, and he gives just enough for there to actually be like a discussion about what's going on and gives like food for thought in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely the least masturbatory of the Refn films I've seen anyway. It's probably my favorite Refn film now as well. I used to really like Drive when it first came out. I think I was like maybe like 18 or 19 when Drive came out. And I thought it was cool as shit. And then I watched it about 18 months ago. And I'm like, for an 80-minute film, this film is fucking boring.
That's kind of been Drive has kind of been the second half of his career because Bronson in a way ends kind of that Bleeder, Pusher, Fear X, I think is the other one. That type of style of film where he slowly like kind of trends in with kind of, I guess, Valhalla Rising, where it's like they're short movies, but you're going to feel the length. Even at 80 minutes, you're going to feel it. And,
yeah,
that's, he's not one to just throw on and watch in the background because you're like, has anything happened? Has anything changed? And I like Drive too. I think Drive is fine. I think it's not my favorite of his. It's a fun little stylish movie to watch. I think it's a good introduction to him to kind of get a feel for him, like how he can be.
Yeah, it's definitely stylish, and this film has style as well. Obviously it's very different from Drive in terms of its setting. We're moved away from the streets of LA to grimy north of England, or I think it's actually London it's set in. But grimy UK in what the 70s, 80s,
Yeah.
when things were not very good economically. A lot of people were emigrating and stuff like that. So, but it still has flair in its filmmaking techniques. Um, I sort of mentioned earlier it's kind of Kubrickian, and I do think that still, just in terms of how the camera is set up, and how the staging of the film works as well. It's very deliberate.
Oh, it's interesting to call out the staging. So, are you talking about that? That's a great point. Though. Are you talking about kind of like, for example, every time the guards come in, they do this great thing where you can see him kind of getting his knuckles ready for a fight, because like he likes to hold these guys hostage, right? Like whether it's
Yeah.
a guard or whether it's a one person who's trying to help him with art, kind of hold him hostage. And then as they come in the door, you can see that look in his eyes of like, here we go. And the way that they kind of frame that, is that what you're talking about, like with staging, like some of these type of.
Not even to that much nuance, just in terms of, you know, he's always very much centered in the frame, and there's always a deliberation to make him seem massive because he's a huge character, just in
Yeah.
terms of his personality and everything like that. And I know Tom Hardy's a buff dude and everything like that as well, but a lot of the time the camera will be perched quite low and sort of shot upwards to make him seem like this real Goliath. Like Tom Hardy is not a very tall dude. I think he's only maybe about 5'9", 5'10". He's not super tall. He just happens to be, he's just kind of buff. Um, but Refn does a very good job of making him look huge, making him look
Mhm.
like as big as his character is essentially. He makes him physically dominant, especially in the scenes now where he's like walking around the cell and the camera's sort of going around and around with him.
Yeah.
And they essentially just have the camera low on a tripod, shooting kind of upwards and just sort of going around in circles along with him. Um, yeah, and it's just the way they frame it to make Tom Hardy look a lot bigger than what he actually is, to sort of match how big of a character Bronson is. I just like how Refn did that, and it seems like that's what I mean by being very deliberate in terms of how it's framed and how it's staged. I wasn't looking with that much nuance as you to know it's sort of fists, twitching or eyes bulging when people come in and out of a cell. That's definitely the eyes of someone who's watched the film much fresher than me.
I do want to bring up, since you brought up Tom Hardy, this might be my favorite role from him. Like,
Yeah, I think
I
so
just think
too.
he's so good in it. Like I think he's a fantastic actor anyway. But this is definitely a one. I think it was one where he really got to talk a lot, which I think a lot of movies avoid because
Mm.
his dialect, and he likes to grunt a lot. But this one he carried it. I mean, he had to carry it. He had to put on tons of different faces and voices, and give life to this type of character. And I think he does a fantastic job with it.
This movie will be up in my top Tom Hardy performances, but I don't know if anything will ever top Warrior. Have y'all seen that?
Warrior's really good. Yeah.
I haven't seen it. No, I heard it's good though, but I haven't seen it. That's the one. It's the UFC one, isn't it?
Yeah. Like with all due respect to our MMA fans and our listeners, I probably have negative interest in the sport. Like
Same.
if it's even if it's just on, like I have a hard time watching it. I don't know. I just am not drawn to it. But this movie, oh my God, it is powerful, about two brothers, and like the fighting is kind of like used to pull them apart and to bring them together, but in just very like brutal ways. It's a very well told story. Really, really good. Probably Nick Nolte's best performance, or at least up there.
And I'm trying to find. I'm just looking through Tom Hardy's filmography just to try to see if there is something that I think I might prefer him in. But yeah,
I mean,
I
obviously
think
Bane.
no, not Bane. Although
I
I
will
can
say,
understand why Nolan cast him as Bane, you probably saw Bronson. The physicality, is very similar in terms of the
Yeah.
fight style, especially like when you watch Bronson box in this, it really reminded me of Bane's fight scenes in The Dark Knight Rises. The sort of the fighting style and everything like that. So I can definitely see. I know Hardy had worked with Nolan before in Inception, which was a much less physically demanding role. But I can understand like why Nolan would have cast him as Bane after seeing Bronson, because especially with the fighting style and everything like that.
Yeah.
I will say with Revenant, I don't think it's Tom Hardy's best role. I think he's fantastic in it, but I definitely think he had a better performance than DiCaprio did,
Okay,
and
I
probably
haven't seen
deserved
it.
an Oscar
So.
for that.
Oh yeah, I've been meaning to see that forever. Who
Yeah,
directed
he's
that?
really good at it. Like honestly, I
It's
think Hardy's the standout in that movie.
your man in Hurat. I can't pronounce his name. I don't think Zach's gonna be able to either.
Iñárritu. Yeah, that guy.
That too.
I've seen everything he's done except for The Revenant, I think. Oh, then I didn't see Beautiful. So those two. But God, Iñárritu's great. Have you all seen Amores Perros?
Nope, haven't seen any
I've
of those
only
films. Not even
seen the
Birdman.
ones he won Oscars for.
Oh, it's brutal. Actually, it's there's that website, Does the Dog Die?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that, Amores Perros is probably the reason that website exists. Like it does have some brutality with dogs, which is not cool.
Okay, so no to that film.
Yeah, but it is so like that guy just knows how to pack an emotional punch. He's such. Anyways, we don't have. This is not the Iñárritu podcast, but I need to go see The Revenant. Thanks for reminding me about that.
But I'm trying to sit here and think. I did. We talk about Adam. You brought up the connection to A Clockwork Orange. It connects to me a little bit, at least for a segment. Is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah.
When they drugged him out real bad, like that really felt like the last act of like Cuckoo's Nest a lot.
Yeah, and Hardy was great in that scene as well, where he's just like you can tell, like it was just something about his eyes or something behind his eyes that he wanted to be able to do. Like it was a very realistic depiction, I thought, of despite being physically unable to do anything, there's still like lucidity there behind the eyes, and yeah, Hardy was fantastic in that scene. I like that part of the film as well, where he's been sort of locked in with these, other characters who are not there mentally, whereas he is a lot more lucid than they are, and it kind of feels like Watchmen with Rorschach, where he's like, you're locked in here with me, kind of a thing, because he is a hell of a lot more lucid than a lot of these other characters that he's sort of locked in the mental institution with, and it kind of feels like cruel to the other people to have him in there with them. But I can just tell they obviously didn't know what to do with him.
Well, and I think that's a big thing with the film. I mean, where does he belong? And it seems like he doesn't know either, because of he changes his name, he changes his identity. But I mean, you can't have him with other inmates. You can't have him with drugged out with them either. Can't really have him outside. So I mean, what do you do with him?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very like interesting topic to me. Like we don't really hear a lot of stories about people like Michael Peterson, and because luckily there's not millions of him running around. But nothing we have is set up to really like clearly understand how to deal with someone like that, right? Because he chooses violence at every opportunity.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, like I said, I've mentioned this before. It's a different time. Even now we do a lot of research on like chromosomes, and there's like the XYY, the ultra aggressive. I don't think he has that. He never had the body type for it, because you develop a certain way. But there is so much with genetics that it's when you have cases like that, we focus a lot on behavioral, and that's important. But there's going to be those rare cases where behavioral's not ever going to be enough. You've either got to find a way to medicate properly or accept it that it's not going to change.
Yeah, like he doesn't have empathy in the same way that a lot of people do, right? Like everybody that comes into his life that tries to give him advice or tries to give him help, like or when he goes into prison, they try to give him medicine. Like you can see it in his eyes. He just doesn't accept it. He's like, he says fuck off so many times in the movie, but like he does it in a way that it's clear that he means it. Like he wants no part of that connection with people, right?
Well, there's a consent aspect too to that idea that, obviously for him to be able to work in a society at large, he's got to act a certain way. But what is it if he doesn't care to do that? What if he doesn't want to be a part of it? How do we deal with that as well? Somebody who obviously doesn't want to change, and that's fine in a vacuum. Maybe not when he's fighting a bunch of people. But I mean, and I think that's I think this is why this type of thing works so well for Refn, because there isn't answers for it. There's no answer to that question, not a real one.
Yeah, he's almost like a man out of time in terms of like how he perceives the world around him and how he believes, just how he behaves. He's like a man out, like he doesn't fit with how society expects people to fit right now. Maybe 500 years ago in feudal times, someone like Charles Bronson or Michael something, whatever his surname was, maybe he could exist and be someone who could sort of coexist in that kind of world. But in terms of a modern setting, there's no room for a man like him.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. Really, it is.
Like, imagine him charging off a boat on a shore, raiding a village. Like, he'd make a great Viking.
Well, this is the thing. Exactly what I mean. Like, there's moments in time where you would want to, well, maybe you wouldn't want to be like him, but you can see the value in someone like him, as in Viking, or if you needed someone to protect your village, there's a place and time for someone like him, but it's not now. We don't need, that kind of character in society.
Yeah. Now he's an artist.
Yeah, and it was an interesting turn, when I went down that route. Like again, because I don't really know a lot about this guy, outside of this film. I didn't really expect that turn. In a way, when it started happening, I thought, oh, he's going to be rehabilitated through his art, and then that doesn't happen.
No, it's almost like art is so expressive, but it's still not expressive enough for him.
No, it just has so much to contain. He just cannot. It cannot be expressed in any way other than violence, it seems. Because like even creating a new personality for himself, he just has so much energy, too much energy for any one person to ever be able to control, it seems. Yeah, I found it funny when I thought, oh cool, he's going to become a painter, he's going to put all his feelings into that, tortured artist. No, he's just gonna beat the shit out of his art teacher now instead, who I had fun recognize. I don't know if you guys had watched Ted Lasso. Do we have any Ted Lasso fans in the house? So yeah, his art teacher is Ted Krim from The Independent, from Ted Lasso, the sort of journalist that Ted Lasso has a lot of interactions with.
That's right.
Yeah, so I thought that was funny seeing him. Yeah, I thought it was funny seeing, especially so young, without the big mane of hair that he wears in Ted Lasso.
Right.
But
yeah. I did quickly want to talk about his parents. So maybe this is another one of those things that has no answer, which is totally fine. But I thought it was really interesting the way that they used his parents in this movie, because they seem to just accept him and like be happy to see him. And there wasn't a ton of, there wasn't any screen time given to them feeling tortured about their son or having like questions about his sanity. It just kind of felt like, oh, that's just Michael being Michael. What, he's a sweet boy.
Well, I think that's like I mentioned earlier, the mom went to go see Bronson and she liked it, and I think that kind of says a lot about them, not in a negative way, but just that him expressing, him being able to do this or express himself to get the violence out however you want. I think they just feel that's him, that's who he is, and it's not they see good in him, but at the end of the day, he's going to do what he's going to do, and I think they accept that.
I think they're kind of purposely underdeveloped though as well, because and it happens a lot throughout the film where he'll interact with someone on the outside, and then once he goes back to prison, we never really see them again. So it happened with, his first partner who he had the children with, and then he went to
That's
prison,
true.
and then we never really saw her again. And then when he got out of prison, he went and met with his parents. And once he finds out that they don't have all his old shit from the old house, we never see them again. And then he gets out and he sort of proposes to that girl who's stringing him along. And then he goes to prison again, and we never see her again. So I think they're kind of purposely underdeveloped to make sure that he's still the focal point of the film, maybe. The aftermath of his actions are not really important. The film is just kind of looking at the man himself rather than the repercussions of his actions, if that makes sense.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And I guess in that sense, the focus, the most of the focus for him, the movies from his perspective is, obviously his trials and tribulations, the things that the people he thinks are to blame or the reason he's the way he is. And he may not see his parents that way. Not really. May not put the blame on them. So what's the point of focusing on them? They're his parents and they're there.
Because
Yeah,
he's a man of
exactly.
principle. Do you remember? That's how he starts off the movie, saying he's a man of principle.
Oh man,
Yes.
I need to rewatch it. I'm
He
trying to
has his
remember the very
principles.
beginning.
Yeah, I think his principles probably differ from everyone else's principles, is the only thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, he does talk highly about his parents at every, and well, even the quote you said at the beginning, Zach, like if my mom likes it, I know I'll like it. Like what an interesting comment to make.
Yeah. I mean, he obviously has a lot of trust for them. And I mean, I couldn't imagine like my mom seeing a movie like this about me and her liking it. So I'm like, that's kind of just interesting to me in general.
Yeah, totally.
I suppose though, like he's never really seen as much of a vindictive person. Like, I'm just trying to remember if there's any ever sequence in the film where he purposely hurts someone purely because he doesn't like them.
I don't think there is.
I don't think there is.
I think
No.
that is that man of principle. Every piece of violence he does, he believes he's justified in it.
Yeah, like even the part where he like takes the guard hostage, like he never hurts the guard. He shouts at him and stuff, but he
Scares
never
him.
hurt. Yeah,
Yeah.
he doesn't actually harm him really. Well, maybe emotionally, but
Yeah,
physically,
it's like
he's
I
never
don't think
putting
he
any harm.
comprehends that. I think he's a very physical type person. Like he's
Yeah,
like, if I don't physically hurt them, I didn't hurt them.
yeah. I can see that, especially shown sort of from the very first start of the when he's sort of talking through his childhood. He always liked to scrap. That's where he sort of does his damage. Whether if he goes to prison for trying to rob an engagement ring, he doesn't really see that as him hurting someone else. He doesn't see that as hurting the people around him. It's just kind of a means to an end. Or going to rob a post office with a shotgun. It's like, well, I was just doing it. Why are you so upset?
I didn't
You
actually
know,
shoot anybody, so what difference?
yeah, exactly. What's the big
Yeah.
deal? Yeah, exactly. It's an interesting sort of view into his mind that I don't think any film's ever going to really be able to 100% get into his mind, but this is a best way to sort of maybe present his reasoning or his thought process.
And I do want to highlight Refn because I was reading this too that he was not allowed to visit him in prison because he's not English. Tom Hardy was the one who had to do all the visits.
Oh.
So it's interesting to see it. Refn is looking at this at a very outside perspective, while Hardy gets to actually play him from someone. Apparently, they became friends and very close. So I think that's kind of that interesting. I guess dichotomy would be the right word. Just to have those two perspectives playing at the same time. And it probably ended. I'm sure Refn would have rather been able to get to know the guy, but I think it might actually be to the film's benefit that he's looking at it almost in a voyeuristic sort of way.
And I think that's what makes it more like I think this film definitely is an actor's film rather than a director's film. Like it's still a really well directed film, absolutely. And despite me talking kind of shit about Refn, I do respect Refn more. I respect him a lot. From he has a vision, and I can always respect someone who has a vision. He's not a cookie cutter kind of filmmaker. Even if I don't particularly like all of his films, I still respect an auteur. And I do respect the work he does outside of filmmaking as well, in terms of his restoration work. I've watched 2 of his restored films personally myself, one of which I've talked about before on the podcast, Night Tide with Dennis Hopper. So I do respect him as a guy, as a person. But But this is an actor's film. If you are studying acting, this is the kind of film you'd watch, because Hardy just puts so much in, and really he is the force behind this movie. If you have a lesser actor in this role, it does not work. The film does not work with a lesser
totally.
actor.
Jason Statham was originally supposed to play.
Christ on a bike. Imagine if Jason Statham was in this movie. It would be shit. As you can put any filmmaker behind that lens, but if you don't have the right actor for this part, it does not work. Kubrick himself could have risen from the grave to make this movie. And if you have Jason Statham playing the lead role, it does not work.
I'm honestly surprised it didn't end up being like Mads Mikkelsen. I know I'm saying his name incorrectly, but I've never heard the correct pronunciation. Because
I would have said it the same way.
Refn puts him in like everything, like at least in his early career.
Yeah.
He does intensity well, but this movie required more than just intensity.
It's a physicality, yeah.
Physical presence. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Physical presence. Like I said earlier, in terms of how the movie's made, in terms of making Tom Hardy look like a mountain. I'm just curious, maybe I'm lying, but I'm certain that Tom Hardy is not very tall.
I feel like him and Charlize Theron they were around the same height in Mad Max.
I just want to look at his height and feet, because my Irish.
You're right about the camera angle, anyways. I mean, that's like it is usually shot from waist.
Yeah, he's 5'9". That's like 5'9" dude. You're not gonna be scared of. I don't know what height you guys are, but I'm not scared of a 5'9" dude. But I'm scared of Tom Hardy.
So no.
Holy shit! Okay. I wasn't expecting that. It's so weird when you only know people virtually. You just don't put height into perspective. Yeah, you're if I'm 5'11" and I'm not scared of a 5'9" dude. You're definitely not scared of a 5'9" dude. But I'm scared shitless of Tom Hardy in this film. I would not want to meet him in a dark alley. So, and I think like what he does physically in terms of his presence and in terms of how he projects himself in this film, along with the clever camera work from Refn, just really really elevates the performance as well.
Last thing, just on the performance, I just felt like I want to call out is I like the moments that they cut to the stage acting, like where he's actually on a stage in makeup, because it typically is really close to a moment where he's at a heightened emotional state. So he'll have something really sad happen, like the first time he was sentenced to 7 years, and you see him crying is the first time it cuts. Then I mean, the movie starts out with him on stage, but then it goes backwards in time, and then the first time it cuts to him on stage is when he has this kind of emotional moment where he's crying for being locked in for 7 years. And so it starts to do this thing subconsciously where when it cuts back to him then in real time or whatever, you see that there's a lot going on behind the eyes, and there's a lot happening there in the brain that you don't understand. And I think it helps his performance, the way that they did that editing, because there's moments when, like you called out the one in the psychiatric ward where he's heavily drugged up. That guy leans down and starts to say, "Hey, we're the same. I understand you." And you can see it in his eyes that he doesn't agree. He's frothing at the mouth. He does this kind of muted like scream at the guy. But you can just almost picture that guy on stage, like talking about it, like the voices in his head kind of talking about it. And so I think those two play off very, very well and give him a stronger performance as well.
Cool. And now, as always, we're going to finish up with any other business, just part of the podcast where we like to just highlight a film that we've seen recently that we want to give a shout out to. I suppose I'll go first if you guys don't mind. Over the Christmas break, I was just looking through stuff, and I noticed an ad for the Arrow player, which I really wanted to start getting into, but for the longest time it was only available in the US or the UK, and I wasn't bothered to use a VPN for it. But I noticed that they had expanded it now to Canada and Ireland, which I was very happy about. So I signed up to the Arrow player, not really expecting much, but I was like blown away by the amount of content and the amount of like new stuff they have on there. Like they pretty much, like when they release something on Blu-ray, they pretty much put it on the player like immediately. So I was like, spent ages like compiling a huge watch list, And like one set, like I was not expecting it to be on there, and it's the new Shaw Scope set, the Shaw Brothers box set. And I'm like, this is all on here, including all the special features, and it's only €5 a month. Like, what am I feel like I'm scamming someone with the I feel like there's like a catch here, but no, like it was great. So I watched the first film from the Shaw Brothers set, which is I can think of the American title is Five Fingers of Death. What was it called in the set? Something box King Boxer. Sorry, yeah, it's called King Boxer in the set, but it was in the US. It was known as Five Fingers of Death because that's the most 70s kung fu name you could probably give to a film. But like you guys know, I've never really watched kung fu movies. It's one of like my big blind spots in cinema. Like I've seen so much from all around the world, but like just kung fu movies in general, just I'd never really seen them. I'd never really had exposure to them growing up or anything like that. I've never seen a Bruce Lee movie or anything. So I
Whoa.
thought, yeah, I know. So I thought, look, let's just go through this. Let's just start watching these movies. They're here. They're easily available for me right now. So yeah, I watched the first one, and like I thought it was so fun. Like it's not classic cinema or anything like that, but like the action sequences are awesome. The fights are amazing. In terms of like even like the sets and stuff, it's really cool. Like I was reading a bit about it, about how basically Shaw Brothers had this essentially movie town in Hong Kong, like on the outskirts of Hong Kong. They had this essentially this big town where they just made all their
Yeah.
movies and built all their sets.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I thought that was super cool. And yeah, it was really enjoyable. I'm gonna be working through the set pretty slowly. I'm not gonna binge them all or anything like that. I'll maybe like watch like one or two a month or something. But I'm going to go through the rest, and I'm super interested now in watching more of these kind of films, kung fu or like Chinese swordplay. I've a bit of a sort of taste for them now. I have a few on the way from Eureka. Eureka were doing a sale on those kind of films around Christmas. So a few on the way from there, including Police Story 1 and 2. Obviously, I've seen Police Story, as we know, which as we talked about it a few podcast episodes ago. And
Mhm.
then I also ordered Raining in the Mountain and A Touch of Zen. They're both by King Hu. And then I also have Eureka's edition of Once Upon a Time in China trilogy, which I know obviously Criterion put out recently. This is the Eureka version of that. So I'm looking forward to getting all those, and obviously going to be delving more into the Shaw Scope set through the Arrow player. So yeah, looking forward to getting into a part of cinema I'd never really taken that much of an interest of or had any exposure to.
Wasn't Raining in the Mountain? Wasn't that like a pick? And
Yeah,
oh
it
yeah, I
was.
thought it was an option.
It came second in the Bacurau.
That's
It
right.
was
That's
between
why I
that
was
and
like, why does
Bacurau.
that one stick out so much? But yeah, it was almost our pick instead.
Yeah, it came second in the Bacurau poll.
I'm trying to see if this set goes into doesn't have a lot of wuxia stuff. So one thing to put on your list if you want to there's so many different styles of the kind of subgenres, I guess, within the kung fu, catalog. If you start going down that route, some of the ones I like the most are if you look at WUXIA films, wuxia films.
Wuxia, they're like the sword play films, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's very much like it's very like operatic. Like it's a lot of the scenes in Shang-Chi when they're like kind of flying through the trees and like
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
yeah, it's like a lot of that. I was paying homage to that, and there's some beautiful films in that genre as well.
yeah. Because I remember many years ago, I did see Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I
there you
always
go.
thought that film looked awesome. So I think Raining in the Mountain and Touch of Zen, they're both wuxia films, as far as I'm aware. Um, Once Upon a Time in China. I don't know if you can tell me if they are considered wuxia or
Not
not.
quite. It's sort of like a mix. Like they're just. It's all very rooted in stunts that people can actually do without like strings pulling them around or whatever that's called,
Hmm.
without
Yeah, I
being.
gotcha.
But it is also very extravagant stunts. It's not quite as brutal as Jackie Chan stunts, but it's kind of somewhere in between. Very, very creative choreography. The
Yeah.
first Once Upon a Time in China film, there's this amazing ladder sequence with these sort of 20-foot or 30-foot tall ladders, and the way they're kind of like using them, and like somehow their points, they're like balancing on a different ladder with each foot and still fighting. And it's just this beautiful kind of choreography that you think like, how is this possible? Yeah, those movies are fun too.
Cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into those.
I can't wait till 2 weeks from now. Adam's like, so for Collection Corner, I got the Shaw Brothers set.
Totally.
But I don't need to now. The Arrow player. I don't. Why would I buy them? I can just watch them all on the Arrow player.
Yeah. I'll go next, just so there's one segment that I'm not ending here. I have to talk about, and I guess we kind of mentioned this to the Patreon listeners. This is going to be a bit of a rehash here, but I finally sat down and listened to the commentary for Armageddon that has Michael Bay and Bruce Willis and Ben Affleck, and they're all exactly who you think they are. And that's has to be the best commentary ever recorded. I mean, I'm sure that's, whatever. I'm sure there's one that I'll find one day and brag about in the same way. But like, Michael Bay is hilarious in the sense that he's exactly who you think he would be. Like, there's this one scene where he's like, okay, don't be mad at me here, okay? But people ask me why there's a gun on this ship, okay? I know it doesn't make sense to have a gun on a spaceship. I know that. But Mattel came to me and they said, hey, Michael, just so you know, like, ships sell better, the toys sell better if they have a gun on them. So that's why there's a gun on it. And he's not joking. Like, he's not saying that with irony or something. He's like, okay, don't be mad at me here. Also, I have to mention, I feel vindicated because Ben Affleck calls Michael Bay the love child of Tony Scott and James Cameron.
Oh, Jesus. Here we go.
So I felt very vindicated. But the real star of the show, quickly I'll mention Bruce Willis is exactly who you think he was. The longest sentence he utters is probably 4 words, and he just sounds like he doesn't care at all. He's like, yeah, I was in this scene and it was pretty fun. Or like, you're just like, why are you on this commentary?
They need a straight man for Ben Affleck.
You what?
They needed the straight man for Ben Affleck.
Yeah, exactly.
Comedy segment.
And then Ben Affleck gets on. Oh, so they recorded these audio commentaries separately and kind of pieced them together one after the other, right? And so then Ben Affleck gets on, and he, like, for probably 5 minutes of his time, he's talking about every time Billy Bob Thornton comes on screen, he's like, wouldn't it be funny if they did Sling Blade here? And he was like, hey guys, we're gonna go up to space. And he does the voice, but he like does it for like 5 minutes. And then he does the thing, Zach, you mentioned earlier, where he's like, so Michael, wouldn't it make more sense to have astronauts trained to be drillers instead of finding a bunch of roughneck drillers to be astronauts? He's like, shut the fuck up, Ben. And like, he's just basically like dogging on the movie. And he, like, I don't know, it's amazing. It's very entertaining. It's a 2.5-hour movie, so it's long, like, and whatever. I mean, I guess it was very popular. It's a decent watch. I don't know. I don't like the movie a lot, but it's a decent watch. But it's definitely made better by the commentary. So that's all I'll talk about. There's a bunch of stuff I've watched, but that'll be my any other business. Watch that if you can. It's amazing.
I know one of my favorite parts of that commentary that I remember is that every time he's talking about Bruce Willis's character, he refers to him as a salt of the earth type guy. Like, yeah. I don't even think he ever says his character's name. He's like, this salt of the earth type guy,
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
I'll finish up, even though I feel like that should have been the end. I think Chris should have finished that up, but I digress. I will do mine. I was going to talk about, I started watching Only the Too Old to Die Young, which is actually the TV show that Refn did. But honestly, I'm kind of tired of talking about Refn now. So I'm going to just switch gears real quick. And the last movie I watched this year was Inside, which is a French, new wave French extremity movie. So you have your like high tension, you have frontiers, all that, where they just try to bloody up the screen as much as possible. This one is essentially about this woman. She loses her husband like a few months prior to a car accident. She's pregnant, so she's carrying this baby on her own. She's not doing very well. I think obviously she's having kind of a tough time with it. And a woman comes to her house who intends to cut her baby out with a pair of scissors because she doesn't think she's going to take good care of the baby and she wants it. It's pretty basic stuff. I love the way the film looks. There's some cheap looking like CGI in it, but you gotta love the ambition they did. They needed her to punch like a mirror, and they're not actually going to ask the actress to cut her hand up, obviously. So it's obviously CGI in some of those parts, but the look of the film in general just is really cool. Like there's a lot of like noirish, giallo type of look in different scenes, especially when the mysterious woman's coming to like try to cut her baby out and stuff like that. Like she's dressed in like all black with the black gloves, and sometimes she's only lit up like if she's outside by like when she lights a cigarette, you can see her eyes, and that's it. It's just a really cool film. It's very violent. If you're squeamish, I definitely wouldn't recommend it. If you think certain things are probably going to happen and you would really, really hate to see that, you'll probably get that. So, be wary, but I think it's a fun time. It's a nice little Christmas movie because, just like Home Alone, it takes place on Christmas. So it's a Christmas movie. That was my last film of the year. I thought it was a good way to end
it. Christmas movie Inside.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard about Inside. I have no interest in watching it from what I've heard about it. But
yeah, it expired from the Criterion Channel 2 days ago. That's why I had to sit down and finally watch it. I was like, this thing's going to expire, and it never shows up on streaming services. So I was like, I'm going to have to go ahead and power through it.
That wraps up this week's episode of They Live by Film. If you want to read more of our thoughts, visit theylivebyfilm.com. And you can also follow our Letterboxd, Reddit, and Instagram accounts from the links in the description. For now, take care.